We're almost done with the NGRX effects for authentication, which is quite complex because it involves many different things. And the missing piece now is the invalidation of the token. We're doing this with auto logout, which in the end just takes an expiration duration, and where we then set a timer to basically call logout once it's done. Now you could come up with setups where you do this all inside of NGRX effects. But I'm not actually the biggest fan of this, because in the end my goal here is just to dispatch the logout effect once a timer expired. So once we could certainly come up with some observable magic to yield that effect, I think it's easiest if we simply clean up our auth service quite a bit, remove auto login, remove logout, remove these injections which we don't need anymore, leave the store injection, leave the token expiration timer, remove that, remove all these unused imports here. So all that stuff which we won't need anymore. Remove handle authentication and remove handle error, so that in there, it's really just a service that is about managing that logout timer. I have auto logout, and I will rename it to set logout timer, because that is what I ultimately want to do here. And in here, I want to simply call dispatch and dispatch a new auth action, the logout action, because that is handled through NGRX and NGRX effects. And I want to add a second method, clear logout timer, and there all I do is I check if this token expiration timer is set, and if it is set, then I will call clear timeout for this token expiration timer, and then set this token expiration timer equal to null. Now that's a way leaner service here, and how can we use that service? We can use it from inside auth effects. There I can now inject my auth service, just as you're used to it. Of course, make sure to add an import to auth service therefore. Here it is. And now in all the places where you want to set a timer, you do it. That would be in handle authentication, but that is a function, not part of our class, hence we can't access the injected object here. We could turn it into a class method, but we can also simply go to our map method here, for example, where we handle authentication, add a tab operator first, which is imported from RxJS operator, where I also get my response data, but which does not change it, and then call this auth service in here and set the logout timer equal to response data expires in, add a plus here though, and we need it in milliseconds in the auth service. If you have a look, we set the expiration duration here. Set timeout takes the amount in milliseconds though. This, however, will be in seconds, so we need to multiply this with 1000. And I do just the same, add the exact same step here for signing up. So before we map, let's also set the logout timer here. Let's also set it when we logged in automatically. So here, where we know that we have a user and we do authenticate the user, we use the auth service and call set logout timer and simply forward our expiration duration, which we're calculating down there. So let's reactivate that code here. Like this. Forward the expiration duration here to set that timer. And last but not least, when logging out here, of course, now I will call this auth service clear logout timer, like that. That should do the trick. And to see if it really does the trick, let's go to the login effect, this one here, and let's not multiply this with 1000 so that it should expire after 3.6 seconds effectively. And let's try logging in and let's see if we are logged out thereafter. So this works, and now let's wait for the 3.6 seconds. And it's a bit hard to see because we stayed on the same page here, but we were actually logged out, just the redirection didn't really work. The reason for that behavior is that we do have our redirection logic here, but actually we have kind of a race condition between our logout in the reducer, where we do clean up our data, which is important for the off guard, which decides which page we ultimately see, and our effect. Now, the easiest solution to avoid this problem is to simply remove the logout action here from the filter for this general redirection, and instead go to our separate logout action, and then here add a new redirection where we specifically target /off. And now with that, if we wait for this to reload and we log in again, now this should redirect us after 3.6 seconds. Logout was already working. So this now works, and with that, let's revert this little hack here. And let's multiply expires in with 1000 again to have the correct logout timer. And with that, finally, our effects setup for authentication is done. And now we have a really lean auth service which only manages our timer in the end, and all the rest is managed by NGRX. Obviously, this entire NGRX part was pretty extensive, was pretty much for authentication. But keep in mind that authentication also is pretty complex in this application because we manage the token lifetime and so on. Now it's basically all managed with NGRX. We are using effects for all the side effects like HTTP requests and local storage and redirection. We're using the reducer for our general state, like the authenticated user, if we have an error and if we're loading. And the auth component dispatches our different login or sign up actions and takes advantage of the error and the loading state. The auth service is used for managing our token timer then. We could move that into NGRX effects somehow, but we would need a lot of observable magic for this. And I think this is just the simpler and easy to understand approach. The auth intersetter and auth guard take advantage of our NGRX store. And therefore now, whilst it was a lot of work, now the entire authentication logic lives in NGRX. Again, it was a lot of work, but now whatever you add is added with relatively little effort. Still, of course, using this entire setup is optional. Now, what I want to do at this point is, I want to do some cleanup work here. I want to look through my components and remove parts which I don't need anymore, or not from my components, but at the auth component. Remove the injected auth service in the router, for example. Remove that observable import, the router import, which I don't need anymore. The auth service imports here, that should all be good. Now, in the auth service, I don't need the auth response data interface anymore. I can remove the user model, therefore, the import, not the model itself. And overall, this is looking quite good. Looks like the application is working correctly. And now, we are taking advantage of NGRX. Let me log in here, fetch recipes. That all is working, now all powered through NGRX. Of course, the recipes area is missing, but before we tackle that, let's look into two other packages the NGRX team gives us.